Hey everybody, welcome back to Not Another Tooling Podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my co-host, Malcolm Brown. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. Clearing lots of stuff up. Got some nice clarity moving forward. So a bit of a headspace emptying scenario for these last couple of weeks.
And I feel like this is probably about the fourth podcast in a row where it still feels like summer.
Yeah, man, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely, man.
Nice, very good. And this week, I am really excited to welcome a very, very special guest. Sophie is not only gets her hands very dirty in the ITSM world and knows it inside out, backwards, but she has also written a fantastic new book called Dramatically Honest, which I'm sure we'll drop the link in the chat at some point. But particularly if you're in leadership in the IT space, this is a wonderful, wonderful book. So, Sophie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Really, really excited to have this conversation with you guys today, and appreciate the plug of the book. Always very welcome.
Absolutely. So tell us, what do you do, and how did you end up being where you are today?
What do I do? I have been a service management consultant for the last 4 years, but my career actually started on a service desk many moons ago. Like most people, fell into IT and then accidentally fell into service management. But I've been in service management probably officially and knowingly so for about 15 years. My career's gone from being a super techie infrastructure and telephony engineer to service delivery manager, service desk manager, all of that good stuff until I was head of service management in a previous life, and then been consultant for the last 4 years and wrote a book at the same time, because I'm also, on top of all that stuff, as you rightly said, very passionate about leadership, about supporting the upcoming generations, trying to future-proof service management. So my book's all about being authentic. So I've been doing that as well.
Wonderful thing, and we'll talk about some culture stuff and leadership today as we go through. But let's start with, let's say you're fresh into an organization, and where on earth do you start? You come in, somebody said, "Hey Sophie, I've read your book, you're amazing. Come and help us with our service management because it's not where we'd like it to be." Where do you even start?
I typically start with understanding what the lay of the land is. Like, we all know, in the grand scheme of things, in any kind of IT or technology function, you talk about people, process, and tech. I worry less about the tech, and I start with like the people and the process side of stuff. So typically, when I go into an organization, regardless of my state of works and my reason for being there, I want to understand, what have they got? Who have they got? How does it work? How is it working? And I typically start with like a series of workshops with sort of key stakeholders, and maybe some that people might not consider key stakeholders, to get the real skinny of what's actually going on, so that I can start understanding what foundations exist, if there are any. Are those foundations built on sand? Or are there actually some solid foundations that you can build from? And then start looking at the bigger picture of, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve? And then start trying to build sort of key objectives and milestones to work towards to support them on their journey. But definitely starting with the people first, because you've got to work with the talent.
A quick question on stakeholders. So just from the reps that you've put in, what is your ideal set of stakeholders? Who are these people? And also, who are the ones that might think they're a stakeholder in this process and are not, typically?
Those ones are often the trickiest ones to manage in the situation. I think typically my key stakeholders would normally be, obviously, you want to spend time with leadership, like the senior leadership, but I would focus less on the senior leadership, and I would focus more on like the process managers, service delivery managers, engineering managers, all of the sort of team leads and above, sort of in that mid layer of management. I would definitely always spend some time with the service desk as well, because they get a different view of the world that not necessarily other people do. But I typically go for that middle layer because the senior leaders, they know what you're there for. They know what they want to achieve. But I often find that it's in that sort of mid layer that you can understand, oh, there's some great ideas here. They've got eyes on and hands on in a different way. The ones that I typically make sure that I'm setting expectations and engaging with are people who often you guys all know this, when you're working in an organization, there's always people, there's a bit of land grab, there's a bit of power, there's a bit of bureaucracy in most organizations. It's managing the expectations of those people who maybe want to have more control than perhaps your remit has told you that they're doing. So it's trying to manage the expectations of those people, keep them sweet, keep them on the journey, but focusing attention on the stakeholders that actually are the ones that have the detail, the information that you need to build that big picture in your foundation.
That's a really interesting point. So we've all come across these people.
Land grabbers, that's a good one. Are you a land grabber?
Yeah, absolutely. So you come across somebody like that who's perhaps detracting from what you're trying to do. How do you deal with that typically?
I use my influencing guns as much as I possibly can. So I often find that in those circumstances, those people, the land grabbers, the people that want the control, the sort of power hungry individuals, it's not necessarily about control to the truest sense, but it's more about an understanding and that need to be involved and wanting to understand what's happening. So I typically try and forge relationships with those individuals really quickly to understand what they're after. And I flip the narrative of the conversation. So when I'm going in as a consultant, obviously, I'm going in as a person of authority because I'm subject matter expert and all of that sort of stuff. But I flip the conversation. So it's like, what do you think? What do you need? And I center the conversation around their perspective. And I absorb, I listen, I do all the typical active listening. I make the furious notes to make sure that they know that they're heard and they've had their opportunity to speak. And then through doing that, I often find that I influence the relationship in a positive way. So when I'm building, whether it's a service desk or some service management processes or the function as a whole, I often find by starting there and having those conversations, going back to them saying, well, this is what I've done. I took on board what you said here. I couldn't quite manage that bit, but this is where your ideas have come to play. And I use that sort of influencing way of working to keep them on the journey and keep them on side.
Excellent. We had a really good discussion about this a few episodes back, and with somebody who was saying that their approach was very similar to listen, because actually those people are probably slightly different scenario, but if they think their ideas are better or they think your ideas won't work because of X, Y, and Z, actually sometimes they have some things that you've not thought about.
Absolutely.
But, which is often really, really useful. So
I think that's the key. It's making people feel valued.
Yeah, and I think those kind of people I think are ideal, because if you can ultimately pave a story and, for a better way, to sell to or to convince them, then the path is a little bit easier. And then whether they've got valid stuff or not valid stuff is someone in a mixture of. If you can appease the people who are, frankly, the most noisiest, then that's also a great path, rather than just omitting them from the conversation, because you don't know what you don't know anyway. If you can bring them on the growth journey, then paves the way for other conversations that might have been similar, especially if that person or persons have a rep in that company for being like that. And if they can see that you converted that person to come on your path, already you've just got this ultimate buy-in then from everybody else who would have earlier referenced them.
No, I think that's absolutely spot on the money. And I think, like you were saying, Austin, you don't know what they know. So they may have some really great ideas or have some insight that you can't get from other areas of the stakeholder groups that you're talking to. But I think anything like this, where you're coming in and you're going to be making a change, that people focus, it is organizational change. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable about it anyway. So if you involve them and you make sure that they know that you're listening and stuff, then you're more likely to maintain the positive relationship and embed that change more effectively.
Great. And I've seen a couple of questions. We're going to slot them in as we go today when there's a right gap. So if we've not got to your question yet, don't worry, we will get to it today. We promise. So you said a couple of other interesting things there when we were talking about where to start. You talked about understanding whether they have the right foundations or whether those foundations are built on sand. So in a nutshell, what do great foundations look like in service management?
Good question.
Oh, that is a great question. I think it will differ from organisation to organisation as a general rule, because there's no one size fits all. And with any framework, doesn't matter whether you're following a full-on ITIL framework, whether it's ISO 20,000, although that is audited, so you've got to be more specific with it. But it's adopt and adapt. You've got to make it work for your organisation. So for me, typically, I would want to know that you've got the right people in place, that they understand what the remit is, that there's no demarcation, there's suitable demarcation between what they're doing and other areas. You've got clear sort of lines of engagement. And then from a process and practice perspective, it's having what you need and nothing else. I went to one organisation where
name him, Sophie.
I'm not naming the organisation. Nice try though. I went in to do a service management assessment and help them embed ITIL within the organisation. I did typical sort of maturity assessment. They were only using 16 of the 34 practices, so I just ignored the other half, because let's just focus on the ones that you use on a day-to-day basis. So I think foundation-wise, you need clear values, you need clear understanding of what your people are and what they're supposed to be doing and what you'll want them to achieve. And with your processes, it's making sure that they're agile and pragmatic enough to work with the organisation and support them on their journey. I don't think it's as simple as here's a box of service management things that you have to have in order to have solid foundations, because like I said, it will differ from organisation to organisation. But if you understand the basics, what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to get to, and then build based on that and put as much best practice as you can in place that is aligned to your organisation, then that should put you on the right path.
Brilliant. And then the other thing that you said earlier, which is then work out, or do they know what they are trying to achieve? And this is a really interesting discussion that we probably have on most podcasts, I think.
Yeah,
right?
It always starts there. Always starts there, really.
Yeah, because it's, in service management, I think it's the worst place to be, right? You're under fire all the time. Everyone's like, this needs fixing, blah, blah, blah. By the way, you haven't got any funding either. We're going to take some money away from you. Get on with it. Why isn't this working? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And trying to remember what you're trying to achieve, and how that relates to the business that you're working with, and making them a better place, right, is really tough. So when you're talking about what are you trying to achieve in the realms of service management, what kind of things do you talk about or ask that get to the nub of joining that up to to something that would make a difference to a business?
I typically start by going and speaking to like each of the various senior leaders, whether it's exec level or their next level down, to understand what's in their roadmap. What are you trying to achieve? What are your pain points? Where's the most pain that you feel? And what is it that you want from tech? Beyond the delivery of things super fast and no problems and no major incidents and all that sort of stuff. But what is it that they're wanting to achieve? I look at that. I then consider the typical outputs that you get from an organisation about what its objectives are and the sort of key performance indicators that they want for that year, and then take that step back and try and take a holistic view of right, this is what we do in service. Customer A in this business unit has these problems. Customer B in this area has these problems. How can we marry this up? How can we make sure that what we're doing is consistently delivering for both of those customers without creating like a whole cottage industry of activity that's not necessarily going to add the value we need it to do? And how can we make sure that our processes and our frameworks allow for those things to happen without pointless bureaucracy? Because that's one of the things, right, when it comes to setting up a service management function or anything like this around service, is people say, well, there's so much red tape, you've got a change process, you're making it difficult for us to make change. Well, that's not what it's about. It's about managing risk. It's about making sure that we are optimizing the way we're doing things to add the most value, but in a safe way. And through those conversations with those senior leaders and sort of building out your strategy, figuring out where can we add the most value. I've seen quite a few things recently on social media, particularly LinkedIn, about whether or not you should have a service management strategy. And I think you should. I think it's having a service management strategy it's not different from the organizational strategy. It's not different from the IT wider strategy. It's all about, what is your reason for being in service? What are you trying to achieve? Where are you trying to get to? So having like sort of clear pillars of responsibility, having a clear objective of what is your reason for being in this organization? Because like you say, typically the ones with the least amount of funding, we are professional crap takers. We're only as good as the last major incident. We make all this red tape because we manage change. So making sure that you've got that sort of clear vision, that then you can go out and communicate to those areas of the business and the rest of the tech function, so they can see this is what I'm doing. This is what you're going to get from service management. This is where we can add the value to what you're doing. Because where you're feeling pain here, let us step in. Let us help. We can deal with that pain, and you can focus on the things that you're working on. Let's allay those concerns. So, long answer to the question. But typically, I start with understanding, going direct to those senior people to say, what is it you need? What do you need from me?
Absolutely brilliant. Love that answer, right? Because you know, a lot of your teams in service are very disconnected from the business, right? You're there, as you say, taking crap all day, and it's very difficult sometimes to be motivated and do a great job when you forget what you're doing. So having that strategy and vision is amazing. And it reminds me of running a workshop 3 or 4 years ago now with it was a telco, and we brought together a load of service ops team, half of which had never met each other before.
Oh wow.
And didn't even know that they exist, and then we brought in people like the chief commercial officer and things like that to tell them about what a difference that they made to the company. And they were like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. It was great, and they were so energized at the back of it. They were like, oh, this is why I come to work. Brilliant. Really, really cool. So amazing.
It's really powerful, I think, having that engagement with that level. Certainly for the people that wouldn't necessarily have that interaction with someone of that seniority. I think there's a lot of power in the fireside chats and things like that senior leaders can do to get that face time with colleagues that they wouldn't necessarily talk to. Sorry,
I totally agree, because a lot of your ideas, people are sitting there going, oh, I wish we did that. I wish we could change this, or I wish we could change that. And when they see it in that context and they come to you as a leader and say, look, I've had this idea. I think we could change this, and our customers' experience is going to be so much better as a result. And they're like, oh, brilliant, amazing, we'll do it. Whereas if they just say, oh, I hate this thing and the way that we do this, can we change that? Well, stop moaning.
Absolutely.
So really cool. Right. We should crack on with this agenda, because I'm going to be talking for a long time. I might have to get you back again, Sophie, at this, right?
Absolutely. Happy to.
Right. So you've gone through this, and you get to a place where you say, okay, all right, the foundations aren't wonderful. We need to make some changes. Where do you start? And with with making changes? We've answered some of that question, I guess, but you know, for those people who are like, I'm not sure we're in the right place, foundations don't seem to be right, what do I do? Do I wipe the slate clean and get an entire new team in? Do I outsource the whole thing, because it'll just be, then it's off my plate? Or do I listen to whatever flashy vendor or Gartner is saying to me to do this week and just go with that?
I think the first place typically would be, so you figured out the lay of the land, you know, you've got some stuff that needs to be worked on. You then got to go through your options. And exactly as you're saying about there, like, is outsourcing an option? Can we work with the capabilities we've got and build upon them? Is there a third option we need to do? I think I would typically avoid anything tooling wise until I figured out the process and the people side first. Tooling for me is always the last. I avoid the bright and shiny as much as humanly possible until I know that bright and shiny thing is the right thing. And I'd build basically a prioritization list. What is the biggest pain point? Understanding what those biggest pain points are compared to, like, what are the quick wins? What can I implement really quickly that's going to add the most amount of value, the least amount of pain, but will drive positive impact, positive behaviors and all that sort of stuff, and marry up the two, because there's going to be changes that you're going to need to make that are going to require an investment of time. And it's not going to be as quick as we can get a CMDB in 3 months, because everybody knows you can't do that. That's
what I read. One of the vendors, I'm sure that's what they said. I think they said 70 days is something like that. Legit.
Yeah. I would like to see them try. Anybody who thinks they could do a CMDB in less than 12 months, bare minimum, unless the company's only got like 3 assets, don't think so. It's a bit of a sweeping statement. But I would start with where are those biggest pain points first and try and drive through those. So, for example, if you're having a high number of major incidents, and a lot of them are repetitive incidents because the same things keep on happening over and over again, then I'd want to address that as a starting point, because that's where the most pain is felt by the business, through major incidents. So can we understand, do we have some problem with technical debt? Is there something going on with human error? Is a third party making consistently daft changes that are causing a problem for us? What do we need to do to reduce that noise first? And then at the same time, is our process up to scratch? Do we have the right people on the major instance? Have we got engagement that we need across the tech function to get through these incidents as quickly as possible? But also, following on from that, what preventative actions are we putting in place? How are we making sure that these same things don't happen again? So I would look at the sort of wider piece to understand, right, we know all of these things are not the level of maturity that they need to be. We know all of these pain points, and I would build a roadmap based on value and how quickly I can get things done, at the same time as making sure that there's no contention in the deliverables. So what I mean by that is, if you were going to do a quick win with the change process for, say, something to do with automation in the background, but you know that you've got to revitalize the entire change process, how much wisdom is there making that quick change if you're going to change it again in 6 months' time when you've had the time to rework it? And it's figuring out the prioritization in that respect to make sure your roadmap of what you're doing is going to add those solid foundations, and it's going to build the maturity that you need to support the business.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And something we were talking about the other day when we were preparing for this is trying to figure out what metrics you and KPIs you may want to start with, right? Because you we'll come back to funding in a bit, but you obviously need some money to do this. You need some money to do your your big grand vision, right? And seeing an improvement in metrics for senior leadership gives them the confidence to invest in whatever you want to do next. So
yeah,
typically you've talked about a fairly kind of easy one there, I think, in terms of visibility, number of major incidents, reducing that. Are there any other key KPIs that you typically say these are the ones that we should focus on improving early on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything to do with customer experience, because you want to gauge that. If things aren't performing the way that you would like them to. Your customer experience is key. And by customer, we don't necessarily mean external customer. It could also be your colleague experience and your internal customers. Definitely volume of major incidents, successful change. How many times have we had to back out a change? Have we got our sort of house in order in terms of how we're managing things there? And I things like how many people can self-serve rather than having to come to us? Where can we automate? Is there a percentage of repetitive processes like password resets potentially where you could get automation in play where it saves productivity in some areas and allows it in other as well? I think metrics are really, really key. It's actually something I was talking about the other day, because it's all fair and well improving your process, but how can you prove that it's better than it was before? Yeah. And certainly if you are going to then ask for investment because you need more people or you need a new tool for whatever reason, then you're going to have to back up what you're saying with numbers and data, because you can't, well, not you can't, but I'm yet to come across a senior executive who just works on feeling. They're always talking about the numbers, show me the data, and they want to make fact-based decisions. So I think going back to the question, to be a very service management person, it does depend for the metrics. I don't think there's, again, a suite of specific ones that you'd want besides the obvious ones. It's going to be depending on what you're trying to achieve, but no matter what it is, you've got to make sure that you can measure from where you've baselined and you know that there are things that you need to improve. How can you prove 6 months down the line that the changes you've made have actually had the impact you've wanted? And if they don't, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I love this. And I think my dream is to take these things a step further and say, okay, we've had less major incidents. What impact has that had on our revenue as a business? Or
cost per incident,
the customer or the colleague experience is better. Does that mean we've stopped churn in certain departments because people aren't getting fed up? They love the technology experience that they're getting here, and therefore less people are leaving. These kind of things. It's an art in itself, I think. To have these discussions, and getting the data is another entire thing, right? But this is absolutely the starting point, is tracking these type of things. And when you tie that back to your strategy and the clear vision of the company, then people start to think, I want these people to have a better experience of these colleagues over here who are serving our customers, because then our customers will have a better experience and we'll sell more stuff, and I get shares in the company, and they'll be worth more, and wow, hang on a minute.
Absolutely.
Back to the strategy piece that we've I think it's one of our first ever podcasts we talked about strategy, but the reason why you want to actually measure the layers of the strategy so it becomes more tangible in the first case.
Yeah, absolutely. Like company objectives and stuff like that, they're often sort of a very, very wordy statement of what it is they're trying to achieve. But what I want to see is how can we evidence that at the same time? So you've got your primary objective, but what are your key metrics that you're going to use to measure that you've done that thing? So exactly with the reduced number of major incidents, cost per incident, I think, is a fascinating number to figure out. Most people just think, okay, what's the cost to the business in terms of revenue potentially lost? But I'm also looking at how much did it cost to have 6 techies on the call? How expensive are those people? Yeah. What's the cost of productivity? What's the cost of now delivering that project on time now because you've had this major incident? And when you get, it's hard to get exact numbers, obviously, but when you get some sort of indicative figure of actually, yes, that costs £50,000 to the business in terms of revenue, but it probably costs you somewhere in the region of like 25 to 50 grand just for resources and everything else that's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
This is Absolutely spot on, because it's something that you can directly change. You have, when you talk about reducing the number of major incidents, sometimes, like you were saying earlier, actually the major incidents are due to a third party, or something completely out of your control. But so promising additional revenue because of something that is out of your control is tough. But promising that you could reduce the amount of people that are involved and therefore the internal cost to run each major incident is something that is totally doable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And using that example as well, when it comes to third parties, if you're talking about cost reductions, what's in your contract? Where are the service credits? What's the service availability that you've agreed with them? Is there anything that we can get back from them? Because if it is a repeated incident that happens all the time, you want to make sure that your commercial side of stuff is set up in a way that you're not left in the lurch dealing with a lack of loss of revenue because somebody else has messed up down the line. Everyone in the chain needs to be held to account to some degree.
We had Alex Clixby on some time ago now. It must be a year ago. I don't know when it was. And he's a fractional CIO. And one of the key things that he generally does is go straight to the master service agreement of whatever partners they're dealing with, whatever else, to make sure the work that's being delivered or the service that's being delivered is being held to account. So a lot of his quick wins early on in those activities are actually contractual alignment, let's call it, rather than doing any significant change. And that in itself is immediate value to the business with very little effort. It's more keeping those partners accountable from a contractual point of view, which is a simple thing.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think quite often in organizations, going slightly off potentially from the question, but I think it's an important point to make. There are many organizations, and I would imagine many of the people listening to this should resonate with them, where somebody in the business has signed a contract with a third party where the support side of it doesn't meet the business expectation of when that service is going to be available. So when you're managing it from a service and a technical perspective and you're trying to marry up the two things, you've got to make sure that your house is in order in terms of, if you want 24/7, all the nines availability, but you've signed a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 contract with your third party to support it, you're not going to get that super duper level of service. So it's understanding at what point in that respect as well that you engage with service management and the technical teams to make sure we can hold those third parties to account, and having that contractual alignment, like you were saying, Matt, and bringing everything together in that one place. There's nothing worse than having to provide a monthly report where the business has felt the pain of multiple major incidents, and those major incidents are not on the report because they were outside of supported hours, because it creates noise and their customer experience or the colleague experience is poor, but we're working within the confines of what's been agreed to.
I've got one quick question, and I know we're running a little bit behind, but someone to slot it in. You mentioned at the very beginning around that change and what to change, what not to change. You talk about the notion of the outsourcing piece and things like that. Just from your history, what generally is better, if that's the right way to put it, the largely outsourced service desk or largely in-source service desk? I know there's a hybrid conversation there, but if we just put both of those things as a black and white position, what generally do you see success in?
I don't think either is better than the other, in all honesty. I think if you're outsourcing, it depends on the quality of the partner that you're working with. Quite often, I've worked as an outsourced person as well a couple of times as well. Quite often it's cookie cutter from client to client. So here's our box of processes. We're going to implement these as is into your organization, but that doesn't work because you've got to adopt and adapt based on the organization. But there's lots of positives for outsourcing in terms of it takes some of the pressure off. The headcount isn't under your budget. There's a different budget that you've got to worry about. You've got the experience, and there's all sorts of other resources that you can draw upon. But then for in-source, it's bespoke, it's tailored to the business. It's everybody in that is invested in a different way because they work for the organization. They know what they're working towards. I think there is, in many respects, there's easier to effect change within an in-sourced capability because you are in control of everything. There's no contractual stuff that you have to worry about. There's no CCNs to raise because, actually, I want you to do problem management and it wasn't in the original contract. I think there's lots of pros and cons for either way. I've worked in insourced, outsourced, hybrid, and all with varying degrees of success. I think even if you were to press me, I don't think I would be able to pick one over the other, because in each of those circumstances that I've been in, I've seen varying degrees of success, because the other part of it as well is how well the organization adapts to the insource versus the outsource. Sometimes it's a real positive, and then like one of the pain points in insourcing is people just walk up to your desk all the time and you can't progress and you can't do the things that you need to do because the walk-ups are constant. You don't get that with outsourcing, but with outsourcing, you don't get the customer experience of being able to go up to someone and say, hey, I've got this problem, can you help me? Yeah. So yeah, there's I could probably talk about that topic for hours.
Very
that leads us actually onto one of our questions, because Joanne Wrighton asks, how do you get away from a 1990s service desk? Specifically, have you got any tips on how to stop other colleagues from just walking up and interrupting the team's work? There isn't a hub, it's not big enough, and culturally this has always been accepted.
Thank you, Joe, for that question. I have not yet found one way of resolving that issue of people being stuck in the old days, people being stuck in the status quo and having the inability to think beyond how it's always been done. I just try to influence, going back to the challenging stakeholders piece. I just try and influence things in the right direction. So those moments where you're obviously on a call, you've got a headset on and somebody's walking up to you saying, are you on a call? I'm like, yeah. It's being polite, but sort of managing that situation. I think when it comes to antiquated tooling, antiquated practices and antiquated culture, it's really difficult because yes, you can affect change from the bottom, but the change has to come from the leadership. If the leadership in an organization is accepting the way things have always been and isn't trying to progress and evolve and sort of be that sort of center of excellence for service and tech, you're always going to come a cropper because it kind of needs to go from both sides, from top and bottom. But it's a daily challenge in every organization. I'm yet to see anywhere where it's perfect.
Yeah, it is a really interesting one because obviously COVID drove some massive change in that area because you couldn't just walk up. And I talked to a number of CIOs in law firms who were struggling massively with the demands of their partners who are used to just people just being on call to fix problems in an instant. But you know, sometimes there are some cultures I walk into where actually they like having that and it's useful, and they're like, we never see anybody, we're sat in our own little cubby hole all day, and actually having a friendly face in IT that can fix things is good for us. And you're like, hang on a minute, I'm trying to drive down my costs and I don't want people being distracted and and all this sort of thing. So I would definitely say, are there some benefits to having that, or to at least having a couple of people in the team? If you had a team of 10 and you said, oh, 2 of those people are available if there are walk-ups, but only those 2 people are potentially.
Yeah, I think that's where, going back to like thinking about what your service management structure is going to be like, how you need to make sure you have those people, whether it's a business relationship manager, whether it's a service delivery manager or a lifecycle manager, having those touch points where people can ask the question. I absolutely agree with you that finding the balance is really difficult because you want to make sure you're servicing your customer, because everyone in service management is a customer. That's what you're there to do. But at the same time, you still got to crack on and do things. I think one of the things that I found interesting post-COVID and during COVID, the use of Teams and other messaging platforms, is people expect an instant response. but you have the power to not reply straight away. It's not that you're ignoring the message. I think we live in a culture where everyone is so connected and social media and all sorts of stuff, and you definitely see it in the younger generations. There is power in not replying. You've got to make sure you give yourself that space to think before you answer a lot of the time, particularly if you're in a level of seniority. But no, I think you're right. I think making sure that when you're defining your service management structure and function, that you have those appropriate ways in that customers can feel the love. They may get placated for a little while whilst you're trying to figure out who the right people are, or if you're busy doing something, but at least you giving somebody that opportunity to be listened to and to be heard, so that then you can take whatever action you need to on the back of it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've also seen is that it's an opportunity for you to look at, well, is this because it is hard for people to engage with us? Right.
Yeah.
You know, when you are looking, and this, I've worked for a number of companies where it's like, okay, right, send me a screenshot of what's going on. And you're there like, right, okay, well, it happens across 3 screens. So I've got to send you 3 screenshots. Oh, and hang on a minute. I can't just copy and paste into this tool. I've got to save it as a picture and then re-upload it. And then it'll just go, oh, do you know what? I'll live with the problem. I can't be bothered, you know. Or next time in the office, I'll walk around to the help desk. You know, there is great technology out there these days that makes it easy for people that can make it easy for people to engage. So maybe it's an opportunity to have a look at that and make it easier for people.
Definitely. No, I agree. I've been in that situation many a time where you've got to paste it into a Word document and upload it, and then get the feedback from people saying, why is it this way? It's so complicated, because then we know there's other tools where you can literally paste it in, it adds it to the ticket, and jobs are good. And customer experience again.
Yeah, that's it. And you've got to think about who your user base is, right? If you're in a startup and everyone's tech savvy and amazing, great. You know, you probably right. But if you're in potentially in financial services, and you know people have been there for years and years, they may need more of here's a video on how to do this, and you know, step by step. If you watch this video for 30 seconds, 99 times out of 10, it will solve your problem and save you a walk around to other people, etc., etc. But anyway, we're spending a lot of time on that question, but it leads me on to another question from Robert Way, which is, service management can differ across verticals, I've just said, but do you think it differs in IT across SME or SMB and large enterprise?
It shouldn't, I don't think, because the premise of service management is the same no matter what, in my opinion. I suspect many people may differ in their opinion, but I don't see why it would be any different. Maybe the number of people that you have is different. Maybe the extent of your practices and processes that you have in play will be more in those larger organizations. Maybe in those smaller organizations, you've got somebody who wears the hat of the service desk manager, the service delivery manager, the infrastructure manager. I know this from personal experience because I wore all those hats with one job title.
But you did get that pay though, didn't you? So it didn't matter.
No, I did not. Again, I could talk about that for a whole period of time. That was way back when I was younger. But yeah, I think the premise of service management is the same. The whole reason we're here is to make everybody's lives easier, to make sure that we're supporting the flow of services from idea stage all the way through to the end of life. We're here to support the customers and meet the business organizational goals through effective, fast, stable, sustainable IT services. And I don't think that should change depending on the organization size. And I think in many respects, the way service management works, it doesn't just have to be IT. I know that there are some differences, obviously, when you go into enterprise service management, depending on what function of the business you're in, but you're still probably doing the same stuff. It's still instant problem change, service improvement, the service lifecycle, the design, the strategy, the facilitation of supporting your customer base.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think the larger the business, often the more disconnects there is between the people boots on the ground and how are we making a difference to the outcome of our company. Right, as we were talking about earlier. See, it should be easier to do that in a smaller organisation, hopefully. And then you've got politics, right? And politics just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the larger the organisation, which is why your point earlier of having a clear vision and a service management strategy that everybody understands, the stakeholders above and the people and the boots on the ground is absolutely clear and critical to move that forward. So next question is, how do you see the role of AI in the transformation of the service desk of the future?
Ooh, now there's a question. AI, everybody talks about AI a lot. I think there is an element of apologies for whoever asked this question. I think there's an element of AI burnout conversation. I think in terms of the service desk of the future, I think there's lots of things that are already in play, whether it's agentic AI or however else we're using it, that can add some real value to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we're focusing people in the right way. I think the thing that always makes me slightly nervous about AI is making sure that we haven't introduced any bias into what we're doing and making sure that there are human in the loop systems. There's all sorts of fantastic stuff in ITSM tooling to do with AI. Like, my favorite thing that I've seen is where service desk agents can use AI to help them write major incident comms, because major incident comms is like a dark art. You've got to make sure you hit all the spots. No one's ever happy with the comms, no matter what you do. It's always too technical, or actually it's not technical enough, or there's not enough business speak, or whatever. I think there is lots of scope for the use of AI, but what that's going to evolve into, I don't know, because I often think that we forget about the humans in the process. I don't think we should be using AI just to save money. It should be used to add value, to increase productivity, and making sure that we are considering how does using this part of a ITSM tool or whatever other tool it is that with AI, how does that add value to the bigger picture, to the goal that we're working towards? Because if it doesn't, if we're doing it just because it's the trend, then we shouldn't go for it. Kind of didn't answer the question a bit there, because it does depend. But I just think we have to be careful with the use of AI to make sure, particularly with the bias, because if you end up setting something up in the tooling that favors one department over another by mistake, because you haven't realized what you've built into the code, then you're going to come a cropper and you're going to upset your customers. You've got to just make sure you've planned it appropriately and considered the impact.
Yeah, really interesting. And actually, I found it kind of links back to Joe's question earlier, right? Because there's so many kind of chatbot implementations at the moment as your first entry into the help desk, and most of the time you're not getting the answer you want. You're getting very frustrated, and then you end up going, do you know what? I'm just going to walk around the corner and see somebody. And bypass all the things like the knowledge base that we had beforehand that you might have gone and searched through for 30 seconds and found your answer, because some AI chatbot with some LLM behind it has just annoyed you.
Yeah, I am the person that presses speak to a human button. Sorry, Matt.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, the human element is never ever going to be replaced. I think it's sort of around improving the overall experience rather than trying to replace the experience. People don't want the experience replaced; they want it better, and better isn't replacing a human, realistically.
I think this is one of those areas where you'd go out and you'd speak to your user base. Where would you want to use AI? What points would you want to speak to a person, or where would you want the value of having something in the background that does stuff for you without you having to think about it? and it just occurs. It's a very the whole AI and service desk and service management is very, very interesting topic.
Yes, certainly is. Okay, right. Last question, which was I think question 3 on the 5 questions we were going to cover today, which we're not going to get to cover, but before we go, is service management tooling.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think good and bad looks like in this space? Which is a very big, broad question, but answer it however you think.
Okay, so when you go to like the service desk show in London, you walk in there and there are some absolutely ginormous stands of the greats and the biggest market holders, whose names I will not mention. I find those tools very interesting because they're very expensive. And it's not just a case of the initial licensing, it depends on the other licensing you get with it, and then you've got the additional modules, modes that you may need to pay for as well. And I think ridiculously expensive tools that you could get for a darn sight cheaper that might not look as pretty aren't worth the investment, in my opinion. I want a tool that I can customize, maybe not to the point of ridiculous, so that I can still make sure I get the manufacturer updates. I want to customize it to fit my needs. I want there to be workflows and automation. I would love the chatbot stuff. I would like some of the AI features that come with it. I want to have something that when my customer, my internal customer that's logging a ticket uses it, they are not baffled by it. They're not trying to hunt around, trying to find stuff. It's got to be easy for them to use. You've got to sort of, we're going into the sort of realms of human-centered design, but it's got to be user-friendly. Like your example, Austin, if you're in like a finance organization where people have been there for years and years, you may have less tech-savvy people there. Well, that's got to be as easy for them to use as somebody that's like super tech whiz at the same time. I want my tool to do its job. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want to have to spend hours and hours configuring it in the background. I just want it to work. And I think there are some out there in the marketplace that, whilst they're lovely and they look very pretty, I probably wouldn't go with them. I'd probably go with one of the cheaper options that I can get sort of 95% of what I want at a fraction of the cost, and make a compromise on that tiny little percentage that isn't going to add the value that maybe other people think it does. Bit of a vague answer, but the biggest and the baddest isn't necessarily the best, in my opinion.
Superb. That was an amazing answer, and thank you very much. I am going to just try and wrap up everything that we've talked about now in two or 3 minutes. So if there's any last minute questions for Sophie, do get them on now, because we are going to finish in the next 5 minutes. So we started with where do you start when you walk into an organization? And you said people and process. Start with people first. And go talk to the stakeholders, work out and those stakeholders, process, service delivery, engineering managers, service desk, work out if the foundations are good. Do you have the right people? Do they have the right remit, right demarcation? Are the processes and practices good? Have what you need, and nothing more than that. Then look at what are you trying to achieve. So what's in the senior leaders roadmap? What do they need to achieve? What are the business KPIs? And ensure the process and frameworks that you have support this without adding too much bureaucracy. And have your own service management strategy with a very clear vision. We then talked about where do you start if you're going to make changes and the foundations aren't amazing. You talked about avoid the tooling until later. Start with the people and process. Fix the biggest pain point you can first, but focus on the quick wins, i.e. in your example, you talked about major incidents that were repeating, understanding what the problem is it tech debt, bad changes, et cetera, and put some preventive actions in place. Then we looked at what metrics should you be looking at, and the 4 key ones that came out were major incidents, customer colleague experience, successful changes, and number of people that can self-service, and using that as an opportunity to drive automation. We'll dived into some of the questions. Matt had one about outsourcing versus insourcing. You said they were both absolutely okay. Make sure your third-party agreements matches what the business needs. We talked about getting away from old ways of IT, i.e. people walking up to people's desk, and you talked about having the right stakeholders engaged and making sure that leadership is driving the change from the top. We said service management should be the same, whether you're in an SMB or a large enterprise, and back to having your service management strategy and clear vision wherever you are. And then we talked about AI's role. It talked about it being a bit of a burnout conversation at the moment, and ensuring that there is no bias, keeping a human in the loop, and making sure that AI is adding value, not just a cost-saving conversation. And then finally, we talked about service management tooling. What does good and bad look like? And you said, in your experience, there are a lot of big tools that are very expensive. You would be looking at getting what you want, 95% of what you want, for a fraction of a cost. So go and have a look around before you make some corrections.
Yeah.
Right. Is there anything major that I missed?
No, that was spot on.
Huge summary that was. I was losing track of the summary. It's so long.
It was absolutely. Look, Sophie, thank you so much for coming on today. We're definitely going to have you back, if you don't mind. That was incredible, and I feel
Absolutely.
like we could do an entire week of this. There's so much to talk about, which is wonderful.
Absolutely.
So for people that want to get in touch with you, obviously the very first thing they should do is type in dramatically honest book into Google and go and read that, because a lot of your wisdom is in there. But if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best place is either through my LinkedIn profile, so Sophie Hussey, or my website, Lapis Consulting. You can contact me via email there as well. But yeah, type my name into Amazon. It's really freaky to see my name on Amazon and buy the book. It's all, like I said before, it's all about being authentic, about supporting leaders. And it comes from a point of being a woman in tech, because that's my experience, but it's for anybody at all who wants to be an authentic person, an authentic leader. But yeah, LinkedIn.
Amazing, wonderful. And I've just dropped the link to the book in the chat for people. Matt, what have we got next for our wonderful listeners?
We are going a bit more technical, I think, for our next two. So on the 12th of September, we have Louis from Enabling, and the general topic is IPaaS. So we're talking all about integrations, automation, and orchestration. And that'll be an interesting one. So that's the 12th of September. And then in the same month, looking now, 2 in 1 month, the 26th of September, we are in Greg from Observability Platforms to, as the name might suggest, talk all things observability. He's a veteran in the industry, so there'll be a lot of good low-level technical conversation in the next September, I would say. Of course, we are also looking for more people to join, so any recommendations on topics, we're putting a couple of polls out as well, so we get some feedback from the group. I think the realization is we're going to start to talk about more, I guess, operationally technical focused things for a little bit as well. So as we move through this next quarter, you'll probably see a bit more technology focused discussions coming up as well.
Superb, wonderful. Right, finishing right on the button. This thing is the first time we've done this. Thank you so much again, Sophie. That was absolutely amazing. Really grateful for you spending this time today. And thank you to our wonderful audience. Look forward to seeing you all on the next one. Take care.
See ya.